Mr. Mike's World. Just don't ever come back. I was taking a nap. So now we are talking about Japan, and we're on chapter 15, and section 1 is about the geography of Japan. So the islands of Japan are really just mountains and volcanoes that stick up out of the ocean. The largest island is called Honshu. So basically the whole country is mountains, but the Japanese live on the flat places, the plains, in Japan. They lived very close to the ocean, so that's where they got most of their food. Now, because they lived on islands, they were very different than other people in Asia because they didn't really come into contact with them. But the two closest countries, Korea and China, both influenced Japan. Now we're going to be talking about early Japanese society in class. So right now we're just going to move on to page 443, which is talking about Japan learning from China and Korea. In about 550 AD, the leaders in Japan wanted to learn more about China and Korea. So what they did is they sent people there. So they first learned from the language. They learned how to write in Chinese, which is kind of weird because Japanese is very different from Chinese. But they still didn't know how to write in Japanese. Eventually, they would learn to write in Japanese as well. One of the most important people in bringing Chinese ideas to Japan was Prince Shotoku, who is a regent, which is a person who rules a country for someone who cannot rule alone. Prince Shotoku sent people to China to learn about the Chinese, and what they brought back was Confucianism. Confucianism taught that wives should obey their husbands, children should obey their parents, and younger brothers should obey older brothers. Shotoku also made the religion of Buddhism popular, and even though it didn't catch on at first, it eventually became very popular. Shotoku also wanted the government to be like China's government, but that didn't really work out for him. So we'll be going over chapter 15, section 2 in class, but right now we're just going to do kind of a brief overview. First, Japanese nobles created great art in their court at a palace called Heian. A court is a group of nobles who live near and serve a ruler, or they just kind of advise a ruler. One great writer in Japanese history was Lady Murasaki Shikibu, and she wrote The Tale of Genji. Now, Buddhism changed a lot in Japan during the Heian period. One change is that people started doing what is called Pure Land Buddhism, which is just where they chant Buddha's name over and over and over. Now, in the 1100s, another popular form of Buddhism called Zen came from China to Japan. Zen Buddhists believe that faith and good behavior did not lead to wisdom, but self-discipline and meditation did lead to wisdom. Now, section 3 is talking about the growth of a military society, and we'll be talking about most of this during class as well. So this will just be kind of another brief overview. Now, Japan had a lot of these really wealthy people, and they had a lot of land, and they were called daimyo. And they decided that they needed to protect themselves and their land, and so they decided to hire samurai, who are trained professional warriors. And the samurai would defend their land. Samurai actually really means servant. Now, eventually, a very powerful man from the Minamoto clan became even more powerful and decided to take over the country. But he did something really interesting. He kept the emperor as a figurehead, which is when it looks like someone is the ruler, but the person who's really in charge is someone else. And so this leader who really had the power called himself a shogun. He was a general who ruled Japan in the emperor's name. Samurai soldiers lived honorably. They had this code of rules that they called Bushido, which means way of the warrior. Now today, the Japanese still admire the discipline and loyalty of Bushido. For about 100 years, the shoguns did a pretty good job of ruling the country. But then the Mongols came in and started fighting them. And the order that the shoguns had in the country was pretty much lost. Now, in the first and second invasions by the Mongols, though, a big storm sunk a bunch of the Mongols' ships. So the Japanese and the shoguns actually ended up defeating them. But the nobles decided that the shoguns didn't have enough power or not enough control over the people. So they eventually took over the government. So the nobles had control of the government, but after this, the daimyo took over and brought together all of Japan together again. And eventually, in the 1500s, a leader named Oda Nobunaga was the first leader to unify Japan completely. So this was kind of a short introduction to what the chapter is saying. Make sure that you remember what we did in class and make sure you read the lesson as well. I hope that you do well on this test, and God bless.